What is a soul? Do you have a soul? Are you a soul? Throughout history, most cultures have accepted the notion of a spiritual essence said to transcend death. Its presumed existence offers hope to the forlorn and comfort to the bereaved. But most scientists, given the remarkable advances in understanding the biology of the brain, are materialists. They believe that only the physical is real. Materialists reject dualism, denying the existence of an independent, non-physical soul. Next, on Closer to Truth, can science seek the soul? Welcome to Closer to Truth. I'm Robert Kuhn. History records ancient and continuing battles between science and spirit, forever destined, it seems, to be on opposite sides of a great divide. Could be dangerous to get into this one. To hear from all sides, we invited 5 soul-savvy experts. Dr. Charles Tart, a pioneer in parapsychology, is professor at the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology in San Francisco. Dr. Fred Alan Wolf is a physicist who writes on consciousness and the new physics. Dr. Warren Brown is professor of psychology at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California. Dr. John Searle, a leading philosopher of mind, is professor at the University of California at Berkeley. And Dr. Dean Radin is an experimental psychologist who studies extrasensory perception, ESP. Charles, your recent book, Body, Mind, and Spirit, propounds the importance of spirituality. What's the relationship between the existence of the soul, if it exists, and spirituality?
Well, spirituality is predicated on the idea that this is more than just a short-term show here with nothing to show after we die, that there are long-term consequences, and that has enormous effects on how people live their life, whether they believe that or not. I don't think we should just believe it or not believe it. I think we should look at the evidence that there is something that might transcend death, that transcends the physical body, and I find there's some evidence for that, which makes spirituality much more interesting to me than if it was just a belief.
And will that directly affect our lives if that's true?
I think it'll affect your lives a lot. Suppose you know you're going to die in a short while. What are you going to do with your last hours?
I'm going to have 2 shows like this.
Do you think that's a good investment for the long term?
I think it is.
I think it is too, actually, in that particular
Good, or else
case.
you'd be off the show.
Yeah.
Fred, your book, The Spiritual Universe, claims to be able to use scientific methods to prove that the soul exists. But how can you use physical, scientific methods to prove the existence of something that's not physical?
Well, first of all, we have to define what we mean by a soul. If we can get a definition which meets some kind of scientific test of provability, then we could prove its existence. I think we already have enough groundwork to start the search. I believe that there's enough in the nature of the way the physical universe is constructed to indicate the presence of something called soul. Now, where I begin looking for this is in the nature of quantum mechanics or quantum physics, which says that there may be a spiritual underpinning to all the physical world.
Warren, you are a neuroscientist, a neuropsychologist, and a committed Christian. Your recent book is What Happened to the Soul. Tell us, what happened?
Well, the position we take in the book is that the idea of a soul as a separate metaphysical entity isn't necessary to explain humankind. That doesn't mean that God doesn't exist and there isn't a spiritual world, but you don't have to add an element to humankind, to the physicalness of our humanness, in order to explain and to account for what it means to be human.
This is not necessarily Christian orthodoxy.
No, probably most Christians would find this a tough road. but this is what I would call non-essential theology. That is, it's not a critical point for most Christian theology.
John, you've been a leader to rediscover the mind, the title of one of your many books. Does rediscovering the mind mean defending the existence of a soul?
Depends on what you mean by the soul. There are different definitions of this, and I don't find the notion of a soul much use because of this confusion. There is Aristotle's notion of the soul, which is kind of a principle of organization of the body, and I got no objection to that. And if by soul you just mean mind, I'm all for it. But there's another definition of soul, which we got from Descartes and dualists and so on, that says there's this thing attached to your body, and when your brain and your body are destroyed, the thing is going to cut loose and have a life of its own. Now, that's very comforting to believe, but I never saw any evidence for that. All the experiences I ever had were caused by processes in my brain, and it's kind of depressing, but it turns out, as far as I can tell, when my brain goes, those experiences go. I'm not going to have any soul after the destruction of my brain any more than I'm going to have digestion after my stomach is destroyed.
Dean, your book, The Conscious Universe, claims to apply scientific methods to the investigation of paranormal or psi phenomena. Can the same kinds of methodologies be used to approach the soul?
I think the same kind of methodologies can and actually have been applied to look for after-death type phenomena. But you would think that as a parapsychologist I would be highly sympathetic to the existence of soul through the empirical methods, but actually I'm fairly doubtful that so far we have any good evidence for something like soul, something which actually survives bodily death.
Well, the early days of parapsychology, your field, of course, survival research, investigations of out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences, and people coming back to talk through mediums and seances was a major part of the field. That apparently is no longer the case. Why is that?
It's true. Parapsychology started pretty much as a study of mediumistic phenomena. But within a matter of a decade or less, it transitioned into laboratory studies of things like telepathy between the medium and the supposed departed loved one. And the reason that it transitioned is because in the first case, you need to know whether something like telepathy might be real. And if it is, it suddenly casts enormous doubt on what a medium says that he or she is actually communicating with.
So survival research in its technical sense has become less important to this question.
No, I think it's still very important. It's just that it turns out to be extremely difficult to find a valid empirical way of testing that with excluding the possibility of psi.
Warren, tell us how you've approached the soul from a scientific point of view. You run a neurophysiological lab. You're interested in brain damage. You deal with the rudiments of mind and brain, and you have obviously a very strong commitment to the received Christian tradition, the Old and New Testaments. Tell us how you can bring this together in a scientific search for the soul.
Well, one thing you know in neuropsychology is that brain damage or brain malfunction creates and changes states of consciousness, awareness, and in a number of situations changes people's understanding of their spirituality. For example, an easy one to look at is temporal lobe epilepsy. A person can have, in some circumstances, an experience which seems quite religious. And I really think that these experiences are in fact embodied in our physical beings, that you don't need to postulate a soul. For this project to stand within Christian theology, you do have to agree or to postulate that God exists, that God is spiritual, and that our spirituality represents our ability to be in relationship to God who is spirit. But it is not necessary to postulate that we in fact have a spirit as another entity which determines our behavior or influences our behavior or experiences. So that's kind of the way we've tried to deal with it.
Charlie, one of your more well-known books is Altered States of Consciousness,
Right.
in which you deal with many different kinds of altered states of consciousness. Warren is talking about a particular kind of altered state of consciousness, which is temporal lobe epilepsy, which has been shown to cause religious experiences
At times.
Associated with,
Associated,
not
yeah.
shown to cause. Okay, you'd agree with that?
So bring us up to date in terms of your use of altered states to show, indeed to prove an existence of a world beyond our physical world when we have demonstrable cases where there's a direct physical relationship.
Okay, we're mixing a couple of things there. My interest is in altered states is that it's clear the mind can work in very different patterns. And those patterns, meditative states, drug-induced states, hypnosis, dreams, whatnot, are good for some things and bad for other things. So they give us different views on the world. In terms of proving that there is something beyond that as a merely subjective phenomena or merely brain-based phenomena, altered states don't prove that per se. Altered states give you a great experience and they may give you conviction, but that's not the same as proving that mind is something more than the body. That's where you get into parapsychological material. The human mind can do things that we can't attribute to what we know about neurophysiology or conventional physics. That to me is the basic scientific finding that says I'll look at ideas about spirituality more seriously because there's actual evidence for it. It's not a philosophical position. The mind can do things a brain can't do.
We've had many discussions in which you like to think of yourself as a very tough-minded scientist as well as somebody interested in the spirituality. How do you reconcile the two?
I reconcile the fact because I'm a human being and I've got many facets. And if I identify overly exclusively with any one of them, I'm leaving out part of my humanity. I don't want to be fooled, okay? I don't want to believe things just because they make me feel good. I want the best science possible to check on the possibility of certain beliefs. On the other hand, I don't want to fall into scientism, into this idea of taking the latest physical theories as if these are revealed truth and we know so much about everything that we can then not pay attention to any evidence. We've got evidence that mind can transcend what we know about the physical body and brain. To me, that's a vital underpinning for a spirituality.
Well, some people think we have evidence. I have serious doubts that we've got very solid evidence about that. What we've got, and I hope Charlie would agree with this, is we have a long history, particularly in our civilization, but other civilizations as well, of all kinds of strange experiences that people have. There's no question that people have mystical experiences and that they have all kinds of altered states of consciousness. But so far, nothing follows. And I think Charlie would agree with that. Just from having these kooky experiences, nothing whatever follows.
Well, kooky is a pejorative term.
Okay, sorry. These unusual experiences.
Well, that's more neutral.
I don't mind kooky experiences. To me, it's not pejorative. I love kooky experiences, but some people might think it's pejorative.
That's why I do this show.
Yeah, but the interesting thing, you see, is do we have solid evidence for the fact that some guy can sit over here and bend spoons on the other side of the room? Well, I'd like to see a more strict scientific method employed in these cases, because the kinds of cases I know where people purport to bend spoons are very unconvincing.
Look,
I mean,
we're looking in the wrong direction because the assumption that everybody's making at this table is that the only thing real is physical. It's even clear that that what's physical isn't contained in physical.
That's not my assumption.
Let me finish.
That's not my assumption.
For example, a magnetic field exists in space and time. There's no physicality to a magnetic field. It's not mass. It's not energy in that sense. But yet we ascribe it and give metaphors for it's wavy, it's this, it's that, because that's what we do. So we have a metaphor for the body that it's a massive thing, and everything else has to kind of fit into that container. There's clear evidence of a subjective nature, of a spiritual nature, which indicates that there are memories of things that people couldn't have possibly remembered from normal data processing.
I think there's no question that people have all sorts of interesting, fascinating, strange experiences, and this ought to be a matter of great interest to us. The point, however, is from the existence of the experience by itself, nothing follows. It doesn't follow that they are in communication with the navel of the universe, or that there is a separate realm that's not part of the world we live in.
But in exploring the human condition, it is important to explore these kinds of experiences.
Absolutely. It's absolutely crucial to take all the data. And part of the data that we have about human life is that people have all sorts of experiences that transcend ordinary, everyday mediocrity. And this isn't something to be lamented or sneered at. It's something to be cherished and investigated.
I'm not sure that nothing follows. I mean, most of these experiences, particularly the ones that are related in culture and literature, a great deal follows. A lot follows, and